Let's talk to Jamie Jenkins, independent statistician, of course, a man that's got his finger on the pulse of just how bad things are in this country, particularly economically. Jamie, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike. How are you doing?
Yeah, very well indeed. Slightly perturbed by what the police seem to be considering to be part of their job. But just before we talk about the state of the nation and how bad the economy actually is, let's have a look at Rachel Reeves. She was at the Lords Economic Affairs Committee yesterday. Here she is blaming productivity.
So there are sort of three things that that affect, I guess, the productivity numbers. It's physical capital, labour supply, and that's the quality of the labour supply, so human capital as well as the numbers, and then total factor productivity, so technology.
It's like somebody sitting in a lecture, isn't it, who doesn't really understand economics, who's got a textbook in front of them. When they get asked the question by the professor, you know, what's going on with productivity? And you get that answer. It means nothing.
I know, Mike. I watched some of it. It was cringeworthy. There was a lot of, you know, it was really, for a chancellor, the confidence of the chancellor in that committee was awful, Mike. Yeah. You know, even Rishi Sunak, you know, it wasn't great under him as a chancellor, but, you know, he spoke with confidence and seemed to know
well, he's got a head in her hands for half of it.
Yeah, and one of the things...
So is everybody else, to be fair.
Well, pretty much. She talked at the start. She was talking about, you know, the things that she's trying to do as Chancellor to try and boost confidence in the UK. And she talked about stability. And she claimed at the start of this this session yesterday that, you know, the Bank of England have been cutting interest rates because of the stability of the economy that she's created, which is absolute nonsense. You know, you need to look at the data, Mike. And the Bank of England have been cutting interest rates over the last year, but they pretty much follow what the Fed have done in the USA. If the Bank of England didn't cut interest rates, that would kind of strengthen the pound, but that would have an impact of hurting exports. We have more imports and it would hurt growth. Nothing to do with what she's doing, because if you talk about economic stability, one thing we can say is Reeves and Starmer promised growth in the country, Mike. Well, we have had some growth. We've had an increase in job losses. We've had an increase in debt. We've had an increase in inflation and an increase in small boat migrants. But I don't think that's the growth that the public were hoping for.
No, exactly right. And this is what I was saying this morning, that, you know, with the kind of, you know, the spreading problem of sort of unrest, shall we say, from Epping to Diss in Norfolk yesterday, last night down at the Britannia Hotel outside Canary Wharf. That is going to spread. People are going to get more and more agitated, more and more worked up about these migrants being put into communities where nobody was asked if they wanted it. And people aren't going to want to pay their taxes for this, right? When she comes to them in the autumn and says, oh, we're going to have to start putting taxes up because, you know, we've got a £22 billion black hole. Well, I can tell you exactly where the black hole is. It's over there in that hotel. And get rid of all those men and kick them all out of the country, and then suddenly we won't have a black hole anymore.
You know, and these migrant hotels, Mike, they're not adding any economic growth to the economy. So we've seen 2 months of a decline. We've seen 5 months of job losses. Now, in June, with the figures yesterday, we saw borrowing at 20.7 billion. Now, Mike, a huge amount of... And she talked yesterday at this committee as well about debt to GDP ratio, and that's going up. And we're at levels, Mike, that you would normally see in wartime, but we're in peacetime, and we're seeing a huge level of debt. You were talking earlier with Theo about the tax burden as well. Now, that's going up to, you know, the percentage of tax to GDP. The one way of getting that down, Mike, is to increase the economy. Now, if you've got tax going up and the government spending money on asylum hotels or giving in public sector pay increases, that doesn't stimulate the economy. You know, I've done economics, Mike. I've done, as part of my maths degree back in the day in my A-levels, economics, where, you know, you give money to people, they will spend that money and that will generate economic growth. Right. Taking more tax and then spending it on the Chagos Islands or spending it on migrant hotels or public sector pay increases is not going to stimulate the economy. That's why debt as a percentage of GDP is going up, and that's why tax as a percentage of GDP is going up. You know, it's purely economic 101, Mike, that she clearly needs to go back to school and maybe have a year or maybe spend the summer at an economics camp, come back, and she might go a different path.
Well, let's try it. Let's have a look at, another clip of her. This is her being really, really awkward when she was asked another question.
At the same time, we also have a challenging economic inheritance with high levels of tax as a share of GDP, historic high levels of government debt, and then also economic growth that really for the last 15 years has been very poor by historical standards because of the weak productivity growth that we've experienced in that period of time.
Well, if productivity is weak, why don't you encourage it as opposed to putting more taxes on companies, which kind of, you know, strangles it? That's part of the problem. But if you want to know what is also part of the problem here, Jamie, have a look at this. This is Ed Miliband talking about Sizewell C yesterday.
16 years ago, this guy,
Speaker, new nuclear is right for energy security.
yeah, that's me, identified Sizewell as a site for new nuclear power. Now we're making it happen. 10,000 new jobs, 1,500 apprenticeships, 6 million homes powered. Cheaper, clean, homegrown energy. That's what we mean by our clean energy mission for Britain.
Yeah, well, the problem is it's going to cost another 38 billion, which the government is going to have to stump up because they can't find anybody else to put any money in, which is all our money, right? 10,000 jobs, he says they're going to create. Well, they're not going to create them in the local area, are they? Because if they had 10,000 people that knew how to run a nuclear plant, presumably they would have employed them before now.
Oh, no, totally, Mike. And, you know, they talk about the Reform government. I think Nigel Farage has been talking about what he would do with his spending, and then the Tories and Labour Party come out criticising it. But in terms of the funding, but these politicians, Mike, seem to pluck money for net zero out of thin air. Now, the nuclear deal is not a bad one, actually, when you think about it in terms of generating electricity. Let's talk about the cost could be a bit expensive, but, you know, let's talk about the billions that he's throwing at solar panels and wind. And I was looking, actually, I was scouring the government website yesterday. I'm always remarkable, Mike. I don't think many people have talked about this. When back in June, the numbers came out that in the first quarter of this year, the amount of electricity generated from wind was down on the year earlier, even though the number of wind farms have gone up. And do you know what the government report cited itself? It was a lack of wind, Mike. So if we continue spending billions and billions on more and more wind farms, you know, it get to a point where there's no gas left. There'll come to a point where there's no lights on because the wind would have not been blowing. There's no kind of sun in the evening. And this is the madness of Ed Miliband putting billions and billions. Let's get money back into people's pockets. Let's get them spending on the high street. That will generate the growth, not the government deciding what they want to do with our money.
No, I know. Absolutely shocking. Absolutely shocking. Jamie, good to talk to you. Thanks very much for putting it all in perspective for us.